Amnesia, the bunker. Chapter 1. My eyes snapped open to complete darkness. Where was I? What had happened? I tried to think back, but my mind was a blank slate. I didn't know who I was, where I had come from, or how I had gotten here. Groggily, I lifted my head and peered into the gloom, but could discern nothing except for faint outlines suggesting a small enclosed space. Cold, damp air pressed down on me. I lifted my hands in front of my face, but could barely make out their shadowy forms. Carefully, I sat up, my joints creaking in protest. I seemed to be lying on a thin mat on a hard surface. Tentatively, I reached out and felt rough concrete walls close on either side. My fingertips brushed against dirt scattered across the cold floor. Clearly, I was in some kind of underground room, though its exact nature eluded me. Sudden panic constricted my chest. I had no idea where I was or what had happened to me. I tried desperately to remember something, anything, but my mind remained empty. It was as if I had just spontaneously come into existence here in this buried cell. Fear threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I had to stay calm and think. There had to be some explanation for this bizarre situation. Perhaps my memories had only temporarily deserted me due to trauma or injury. Maybe they would return if I could just find a way out of this dark tomb. With trembling hands, I used the walls to pull myself to my feet. I nearly collapsed as dizziness washed over me. I waited for it to pass, leaning heavily against the wall and breathing deep. A stale metallic scent permeated the enclosure. Once stable, I shuffled forward with one hand stretched out until I felt a cold metal door barring my way. Relief washed over me. If there was a door, then there must be a way out. I fumbled along its edges in the blackness until my fingers caught on a handle. I twisted it gently, but it refused to budge. My heart sank. Of course it would be locked. I was clearly a prisoner of some kind. But who would have put me down here without any memories? And why? A thin line of light suddenly appeared along the floor. I gasped and looked up to see a slit opening near the top of the door, allowing weak light to filter in from some unknown source. I peered desperately through, hoping for some glimpse to hint at my whereabouts. But I could only make out a dim, dusty hallway extending onward, fading swiftly into shadow. My mind swirled with questions to which I had no answers. All I could do was search this accursed place and pray I found a means of escape, as well as some clue explaining the nightmare I had awoken into. Grasping the handle firmly once more, I prayed someone would eventually come to unlock the heavy door. But deep in my heart, I worried only darkness awaited me here, concealing unspeakable secrets I was not sure I wanted to uncover. Chapter 2. Time drifted by slowly in my claustrophobic cell. No one had yet come for me. My fear threatening to bubble over into panic again, I paced the tiny enclosure over and over, pushing back the oppressive shadows with movement. My missing memories gnawed at me relentlessly. I felt disabled and helpless without my own identity, my own recollections to anchor me. What events could have possibly erased my very self? I stopped suddenly, tilting my head. Was that shuffling footsteps I heard in the distance, the echo of a heavy door closing? I rushed to the slit and peered out desperately. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a bobbing light. Hope soared within me, then curdled to dread. Did I really want my captors to appear? But I had to find out where I was and what had befallen me. I had to recover my lost past. The glow approached until it fell upon my door, making me squint and turn away after so long spent in darkness. There was a heavy clank, then the door groaned open. I blinked against the harsh yellow light now spilling over me as a silhouette appeared in the doorway. "On your feet," a gruff voice commanded. I rose unsteadily. A thick-set man in a military uniform glared down at me. His features were hard and motionless. In one hand he hefted an old kerosene lantern, the source of the feeble light barely illuminating the space. Darkness still encroached all around us. "Where am I?" I blurted out. "What is this place?" The soldier's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He merely stepped back and gestured out the door with the barrel of the rifle gripped in his other hand. I hesitated, then shuffled past him into the hallway, flinching as he slammed the heavy door shut behind me. "Walk," he ordered. "No talking." With the soldier close on my heels, I moved down the dusty corridor. The walls were concrete, covered in cracks and damp stains. Rusted pipes and tangles of wire poked through in places. The air smelled of dirt, decay, and chemicals. There were no windows anywhere, only more steel doors lining the hallway. I heard faint echoes from far away that sounded vaguely like human voices, though I could not make out any words. We seemed to be inside some kind of underground military bunker or base. But what was it doing here? And why was I trapped inside? We passed more soldiers on patrol who paid me little attention. My apprehension growing, I was prodded through a maze of claustrophobic corridors that disoriented me quickly. I lost all sense of which way we had come from. At last we came to a heavy steel security door. The guard escorting me pounded on it loudly until, after a long moment, it slowly creaked open from within. Beyond was a larger room cluttered with dusty equipment and piles of papers and boxes. The air felt marginally less stale and confined here. Before I could get my bearings, the guard gave me a shove that sent me stumbling into the center of the room. I heard the door clang shut behind me. I turned to see I was now locked in here alone. At first glance, this space appeared to be some kind of abandoned storage area or lab. Caked layers of dirt told of years of neglect. But I realized with growing excitement that if I searched thoroughly, this room might yield some clue to my current predicament. Shelves and cabinets lined the walls, packed haphazardly with books, folders, and strange objects. I began sorting through everything, scanning the pages and notes I uncovered. Most were faded, coated, or damaged, offering only tantalizing fragments rather than full revelations. But as I pieced together what I could, an unsettling picture slowly took shape. There were references to experimental weapons research, energy sources, and something about utilizing plasmas. Much of the terminology was archaic and esoteric, but clearly something like clandestine scientific pursuits had once taken place here. Other notes confused me further with arcane symbols, occult references to rituals and ceremonies, and scraps describing injections, transfusions, and vivisection. Just what kind of ghastly research had gone on in this buried place? I shuddered at visions of human experiments and strange rites conducted in these darkened chambers. What was this nightmarish bunker? I froze as the door lock suddenly clicked open. Quickly hiding my stolen papers, I tried to still my pounding heart as heavy footsteps entered. A tall man with a gaunt face surveyed me coldly before offering an unnerving smile that did not reach his eyes. He wore a long black coat over what appeared to be an outdated military uniform. "So, you are awake at last," he said in a perfectly cultured baritone that contrasted with the brutish soldiers I had encountered so far. "We have much work ahead of us." Before I could react, he jabbed a needle into my neck and injected some unknown substance. As the chemical overwhelmed my senses, my vision began to dim. I collapsed to the hard floor, the man's next words echoing ominously as consciousness faded. The experiments shall now begin. Chapter 3. When I regained hazy awareness, I was no longer in the cluttered storage room. I found myself now strapped upright to a cold metal table in a sterile chamber very different from anywhere I had seen in the bunker so far. Banks of arcane machinery surrounded me, spitting and humming with unknown energies. Strange fluid-filled vials bubbled through coils and conduits. The air held a sharp chemical sting, accompanied by an unsettling medicinal scent mixed with something foul beneath, like rotting meat. A group of men in white lab coats hovered around a control panel just out of view. They took no notice of me as they calibrated valves and flipped switches. I strained fruitlessly against the metal cuffs binding my limbs. Fear threatened to choke me. What twisted agenda had these men planned for me? Another man entered the room, but this was no mere scientist. His black uniform was threaded with gold sigils I did not recognize, along with badges and medals marking significant rank. He carried himself like one long accustomed to obedience. His angular features were sharp and predatory, yet his intense dark eyes gleamed with potent intellect. He surveyed the machinery with satisfaction before turning that penetrating gaze on me. I shuddered, but refused to look away, determined to show some defiance. After a moment, his thin lips twisted in what might have been amusement. "Welcome to my laboratory," he greeted me. "I am Gruppenführer von Klaus, head of the fuel project, and you are Subject 21, one of the awakened." I frowned. None of those terms held any meaning for me. When I did not reply, he continued conversationally, "Tell me, Subject 21, when did you first regain consciousness in your holding cell?" I remained silent, only glaring back. The Gruppenführer nodded, as if unsurprised by my lack of cooperation. "No matter, I see the revival process has left you disoriented," he noted. "In time, your faculties will return, but first, we have tests to conduct. This is a momentous day, yet only the first step in unlocking your true potential." He made a subtle gesture, and the scientists immediately sprang into action at their control boards. A strange hum reverberated through the room. The bizarre equipment surrounding me glowed, crackled and hissed as unknown energies pulsed through. "Initiating first infusion sequence," announced one of the scientists. Across the room, a pump engaged, and viscous red fluid began flowing down a tube into the fore pierced into my flesh. At first I felt nothing, but then a curious tingling warmth seemed to seep into my veins. The warmth rapidly built into searing heat, as if my blood were boiling inside me. A sudden convulsion racked my body against the restraints. I thrashed my head and clenched my teeth, refusing to cry out. "Interesting," von Klaus remarked, studying my reactions. "Increase the infusion dosage." As the scientists adjusted valves, the blistering fire within my veins turned white-hot, threatening to consume me from the inside. This time I could not hold back a scream of agony as the inferno raged through me. My vision went red, then darkened completely. For a time I knew only torment, and I prayed for death's release. But I did not die. Slowly, the pain receded enough for me to regain scattered awareness. My body still twitched uncontrollably in the aftershocks. I realized the scientists were now attaching electrodes to my skin at vital points. The Gruppenführer watched over their efforts, making small adjustments. When they were ready, he turned back to me, his eyes alight. "Now we shall truly test your capacity. But first, Subject 21, tell me, what do you know of the Fuel Society?" I simply glowered back through pained breaths, unwilling to entertain his bizarre interrogation. His lip curled in a hint of frustration at my lack of response or recognition. "No matter," he decided. "You will learn." He gave a sharp nod to his subordinates. "Full stimulation now." Agonizing electrical current suddenly surged through me, tearing an anguished scream from my raw throat. My back arched violently against the restraints until I thought my spine would break. This was nothing like the strange heated infusion. Sheer lightning now crackled through my every nerve, threatening to turn me inside out. I wondered distantly if this was what it felt like to burn alive. Just when I thought my heart would burst, the current ceased. I sagged in the restraints, wisps of smoke rising faintly from my convulsing body. The pain had been all-consuming beyond comprehension. Yet I clung stubbornly to consciousness. Von Claus leaned over me, his raincoat rustling. "Remarkable resilience," he murmured. "But perhaps that is to be expected." He made a notation on a metal clipboard. "Again, increase amplitude by 20%. No. I wanted to scream. But before I could even gather the breath, the lightning tore through me once more, even more devastating than before. My vision went white. I was lost, dissolved, unable to tell where my seizing body ended and the voltage coursing through it began. I felt myself slipping away into a freefall untethered in reality. Then this fresh torture also ceased, leaving me adrift in echoing agony. I shuddered uncontrollably, too spent even to groan. All capacity for thought or awareness had been seared away. I hovered in a strands between being and nothingness. Distantly, I heard Von Claus speaking. Neural impact remains minimal. Perhaps the ancient texts were indeed accurate. Even after long dormancy, the seeds may have taken root in their very DNA. We must uncover how to unlock their full potential through this unique lineage. His voice faded out. I felt another injection pierce my skin. My eyelids grew unbearably heavy. Against my will, I tumbled back into the abyss of dark unconsciousness. But before oblivion took me, one last phrase forced itself through the haze in my fading thoughts. "The experiments shall continue." Chapter 4. I drifted aimlessly in and out of foggy semi-consciousness, haunted by vivid nightmares reliving the agony of the fuel researchers' sadistic tests. Each time I awoke, I found myself once again restrained in the sterile laboratory, filled with arcane machinery and intricate bio-occult equipment, whose malevolent purpose I did not want to know. And each time, the impassive Gruppenführer waited patiently nearby to resume his experiments on me. During brief moments of tortured awareness between sadistic procedures, I sometimes overheard the researchers discussing me. They referred to me oddly as one of the dormant assets that had been reactivated. I still had no memories of my own life before this to make sense of their cryptic remarks. Yet my gut twisted, warning me there were awful secrets lurking behind their clinical jargon. What were they doing to me? And why did it seem like I was not their first victim? Fear and despair threatened to crush what little will I had left. But I refused to surrender whatever fragment of identity remained to me. I was not merely Subject 21. As they insisted on calling me, I was a human being. I had a name, a past, even if I could no longer recall them. I clung fiercely to this conviction during my semi-conscious intervals, using it to steel myself for whatever new bestialities they planned next. At last they seemed satisfied with the results from the latest round of injections, transfusions, and stimuli. The Gruppenführer himself released my restraints, though I was far too weak to consider any foolish escape attempt. On your feet, Subject 21, he commanded. Dizzy and nauseous, barely able to stand, nevertheless I complied, determined not to show weakness before my tormentors. Von Claus regarded me with an appraising eye. Seemingly satisfied with whatever he observed, he said, "Come, the next phase of preliminary trials begins." Half dragging my shambling steps, he and the guards escorted me from the laboratory down an unfamiliar maze of corridors. We passed more tattooed soldiers on patrol, their eyes cold and pitiless. Where were we going now? What fresh nightmare awaited? I was surprised when we emerged into a large mess hall. Long tables were packed with scores of figures who all turned to stare as I entered. I blinked in surprise and confusion. They all wore simple clothing like rough prisoner uniforms. But more shocking was that many bore obvious physical deformities, changes seemingly wrought by torture. One man sported bulging eyes and swollen joints. Another exhibited horrific burns. A woman's hands appeared overgrown and claw-like. Some figures seemed diminished and withered, while others loomed tall and gaunt with spindly limbs. A low susurrus filled the hall as they all observed me with curiosity tinged by something darker. Resentment? Or was it envy? What linked these misshapen wretches? With growing unease, I also now noted the heavy security doors and the guards stationed around the perimeter, weapons at the ready. Whatever this chamber was, these deformed people were its prisoners. Von Claus ignored the disturbing crowd, leading me through their midst towards a table in the far back. As I weaved between the rows, the figures leaned away warily yet never broke their intense stare. Up close, I realized some had disturbing milky eyes or bulging veins snaking across sallow skin. The chemical stench here was overwhelming. Just who were these poor souls? At the back, we came to a table occupied by two men. The Gruppenführer indicated I should sit across from them. Uneasily, I lowered myself onto the crude bench, wincing as my lingering pains flared up. Von Claus remained standing over us. The men's wrinkled faces studied me appraisingly. They appeared at least 2 decades older than me. One was rail-thin and hairless, while the other had a distended jaw full of broken teeth. Both sets of eyes glinted with cunning. When they spoke, their voices were cracked and harsh. "So new blood joins us at last," rasped the taller one. "Took them long enough to rouse you. They've had precious few left to pick from lately." He gave a phlegmy chuckle. His companion leaned forward, his bulging eyes roving over me. "Still can't believe so many of us survived down here, dormant for so long, and now here we are again. The name's Klaus, and my ugly friend here is Heinrich." He paused expectantly, but I just stared back blankly. Klaus leaned back, seeming disappointed by my silence. "Guess they really did a number on your head, huh, kid?" He gave a grim sigh. "Well, you're one of us now either way. We freaks have to stick together in this hellhole. The guards may gas us at any moment if we don't play nice for our keepers." He nodded towards Von Claus standing nearby. I shook my head mutely, still uncomprehending. Von Claus chose that moment to speak up. "You will remain here for now. Subject 21. Observation indicates you are still disoriented following the awakening process. Some resocialization may facilitate acclimation." His pale eyes fixated on me intently. "I will be very interested to monitor your interactions. There is still so much we do not understand about your special nature." With that ominous statement, he turned and departed with most of the guards, though many remained keeping vigilant watch. I sat numbly, trying to make sense of what I had seen. After a moment, Klaus gave a sympathetic snort. poor bastard really doesn't remember anything, does he? How much you want to bet they fried his brains getting him functional again? I bristled at his words, but said nothing. Heinrich ran a distorted hand through patchy hair. We've all lost pieces of ourselves down here. Maybe just as well, if you've forgotten the worst, be glad you missed out on years of treatments and tests from that monster Claus and his freakish research. He shuddered. Makes my skin crawl just looking at the snake. Gives me the itching, you know. I stared down at the grimy table silently. These damaged men seemed to believe I'd been trapped here for years already, undergoing the same ungodly experiments inflicted on them. Could it be true? Had I lost not just my memories, but entire decades of my life to this unfathomable suffering? The possibility threatened to crack the last shreds of my sanity. Klaus must have read the spiraling distress in my eyes. He reached over and gripped my shoulder. Hey kid, stick with us, and we'll fill you in. Maybe it'll help shake loose some memories. Who knows? We remnants have to look out for each other if any of us plans on getting out of this hellhole alive. Chapter 5. Over the next several days, I remained confined with the other special research subjects, as the researchers clinically termed us. No new torturous experiments were administered, at least for now. But we were still prisoners, with minimal rations and amenities doled out grudgingly by our captors. Escape seemed impossible, with the constant armed guards monitoring all exits. My fellow subjects avoided me at first, glancing at me warily from a distance. I couldn't blame them. After enduring years of arbitrary cruelty, who could trust a newcomer among them? But Klaus and Heinrich took me under their wing, explaining what they could of our surroundings and situation. From their stories, I tried to piece together the monstrous context into which fate had plunged me. The Fuel Society, it seemed, was a clandestine organization of occult-obsessed German aristocrats and military officers with heretical beliefs. Their hidden research here delved into unlocking the full potential of the human form through esoteric means, they told me, aiming to develop soldiers with supernatural powers. Many details remained unclear to my comrades, as their own memories had become fragmented and warped by endless experimentation. But they shared gleanings of overheard conversations and glimpses of mysterious rituals conducted deep below in the bunker levels we could not access. Something about tapping into primordial forces beyond ordinary reality. Klaus also told me in hushed tones that new subjects had not appeared here in some time until I was brought in. Most of the bunker complex sat abandoned and forgotten. They must have woken you from lower cryo to top up the lab stock. Pickings have gotten slimmer lately, so you're a rare bird now, kid. His words stirred that unrelenting unease in me. What had Von Claus and his occultist cronies done to me in the past? What dark secrets lurked locked in my erased memory? The possibility of missing decades gnawed at me relentlessly. When I could stand it no longer, I confronted the Gruppenführer directly the next time he came to observe us. Mustering all my nerve, I stepped forward and blurted out, just how long was I kept prisoner down here? His cold gaze turned on me, studying me intently for long moments before replying. You still have much to relearn, Subject 21. Your sense of self remains, confused, but very well. He gestured for me to walk with him as he turned and exited the mess hall. With no choice, I followed, skin crawling at his proximity as we walked together down the empty corridor. In truth, you only slumbered in stasis for a handful of years. Von Claus watched me closely to gauge my reaction. We reawakened you now, because the project is entering a new critical phase. Fresh resources are required. I shivered at his clinical, predatory tone, but felt a small spark of relief. So I had not lost decades here after all. but his next words extinguished that flicker of hope. However, your original tenure with us was significantly longer, nearly a decade all told. The Gruppenführer gave a thin smile. You showed particular potential and resilience during your first cycle of trials. It seems we chose well to place you in stasis for future use. My gut lurched. A decade of torments. My mind reeled at the realization. 10 years ripped away, with only agony left imprinted on my mutilated flesh. I sagged against the wall, barely resisting the urge to retch as despair threatened to crush me completely. Von Klaus watched my anguish with detached curiosity. Yes, a remarkably robust subject. Your lineage provides such fertile soil for our work. Before I could demand answers about my so-called lineage, his head cocked slightly, as if listening. A moment later, a distant klaxon began to echo through the bunker halls. The Gruppenführer's expression darkened. A containment breach, he muttered. I must attend to this. He speared me with one last probing look. We will continue your orientation soon. Then he turned sharply and hastened away. I leaned against the wall, mind still reeling. 10 years enduring unspeakable tortures at the hands of these monstrous occultists and their deranged pseudoscience. Rage and despair churned within me. But I could not give in. I had to find a way out. If I could survive 10 years as their twisted experiment once, I could somehow endure again long enough to make an escape. I just prayed I could keep enough of my sanity intact to achieve it. But the walls of this cursed bunker seemed to close around me tighter with each new revelation. Chapter 6. Over the next few days, an undercurrent of tension seemed to grip the fuel researchers and guards. Security patrols doubled. Researchers converged urgently in restricted areas from which raised voices sometimes echoed. The guards became twitchier, quicker to threaten us subjects with reprisal for the smallest infraction. My comrades whispered of some troubling incident that had command on edge, perhaps another containment breach. But details were scarce. The occultists sharing little of their activities with us wretched test subjects. A week after my disturbing conversation with von Klaus, the groups of white-coated researchers abruptly stopped coming to escort prisoners for daily experimentation. The tests and injections simply halted without explanation. Meals became irregular and guards increasingly sparse. An ominous atmosphere of unease settled over the bunker. Something's got them spooked good, muttered Klaus as we lingered over our meager breakfast rations one day. Haven't seen this level of scrambling since the last breach years back. Whatever's got their goose, maybe it'll be our chance if we're ready. His eyes turned distant, thoughtful. The other subjects murmured nervously at his veiled hints of uprising. Such notions were surely suicidal here in the Viper's Nest. Before more could be said, a commotion erupted near the mess hall entrance. Shouts echoed from the hall beyond, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. My comrades froze, faces blanching. Had the guards finally come for us? But it was no execution squad that burst violently through the doorway. To my shock, the half-dozen figures that surged inside wore a motley assortment of stained guard uniforms and laboratory coats, not the expected polished uniforms and tactical gear. They carried an array of battered firearms, clearly scavenged from fallen security patrols. The frenzied invaders quickly seized control of the exits, while keeping their makeshift weapons trained on the huddled prisoners. "All right, on your feet, you wretched kind," shouted one invader in a blood-spattered lab coat. "Today you follow our orders, yes?" His voice had a strange guttural rasp I had not heard before, almost a growl underlying the words. As he stepped further into the light, I stifled a shock gasp. The man's face was a ruin, his features distended and oddly animalistic now, despite clearly once having been human. What experimental atrocity could have wrought such a metamorphosis? Klaus stood up beside me, hands raised submissively. But his gaze remained assessing, alert. "You're the breach, aren't you?" His tone was conversational, as though addressing a guest who had arrived unannounced, rather than a monstrous armed raider. "Been a while since any of you surfaced. What can we do for you fine folk?" The lead mutant gestured sharply with his captured rifle, baring jagged teeth. "No talking, you come with us now. Take us to shut down the failsafe so we can leave this cursed hole." Heinrich stood up next to Klaus. "And why would we know how to do that?" he asked reasonably. Behind the monstrous invaders, I spotted a couple of the prisoner subjects quietly shifting towards the undefended rear entrance. A distraction might be all that was needed. With startling speed, the lead mutant suddenly leapt and grabbed Heinrich by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "Do not play your deceitful games, kind," he spat as Heinrich gasped and choked. "We know you mewing thralls have served the frail lords faithfully for many harvests now. You know the shape of their maze and all its secrets." He shook Heinrich violently. "You will guide us out or be crushed underfoot. Choose your fate." With that, he hurled Heinrich savagely across the room to crash against the far wall and slump groaning to the floor. The other mutant raiders howled with animal rage, an unnerving sound. Their deformities and twisted voices marked them as surely as those the fuel magics had warped under more controlled conditions. But what had driven these shattered creatures to openly revolt with such frenzy? Klaus swallowed nervously but kept his composure. "Right then, you've made your point clear enough," he offered, palms raised in concession. Behind the mutants, I glimpsed two more prisoners discreetly slide through the vulnerable rear door left unguarded. "We'll cooperate as needed. Now what say we all just take a breath and talk this through, see what's to be done." With a blur of motion, the lead mutant suddenly lunged and seized Klaus by the neck, cutting off his words. "No more of your sly words, kind," he roared, face contorted in fury. "We do not negotiate. You will obey or your life ends now." To my horror, he drew back a clawed hand, clearly meaning to slice Klaus open from throat to belly. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest food tray and hurled it at the mutant's head, yelling, "Stop." The metal tray clanged off the back of the monster's skull. He dropped Klaus, who crumpled to hands and knees, gasping for breath. The mutant whirled, with an enraged howl, corrupted visage locking onto me. He bared his filed fangs and tensed 2 pounds. "Wait," I cried desperately, holding out a warding hand. "I'll help you find a way out safely," I promised, slowly backing away. "Just don't kill anyone else. I had to stall them somehow. If I could buy time, maybe help might yet come." The lead mutant tilted his head, studying me curiously. His lips peeled back further, exposing more of the long, jagged teeth lining his distorted jaw. "You care nothing for the kind, the mewing sheep," he rasped. He inhaled deeply, scenting the air. "No, I smell it now. You're different from these lesser beasts. You are like us." He relaxed slightly from his predatory stance. Behind him, his fellow mutants shuffled in uncertainty. I forced myself to meet his gaze steadily. "I'm not like anything anymore," I said hollowly. "But I give you my word, I'll do what I can to get everyone out of here without more death." After a long, tense moment, the mutant leader gave a curt nod. "Very well, little kin, we shall see if you keep your word. But if you seek to betray us, You will surely die." With that, he turned and began herding the remaining prisoners towards the exit at gunpoint. As we passed the slumped forms of the guards his followers had executed on their rampage in here, I fervently prayed help would arrive before these unstable creatures decided to butcher us all in their quest for escape. Chapter 7. The liberated mutants forced us captive test subjects to guide them through the sprawling bunker complex, seeking the hidden exits. They killed any guards or researchers we encountered with savage fury before looting keys and weapons from the bodies. After days without seeing our captors, the fuel researchers were only now emerging cautiously from wherever they had sequestered themselves during the chaotic containment breach. But their pale faces and paltry sidearms were feeble protection against the hulking mutant's brute strength and ongoing metamorphosis into something no longer human nor sane. The mutants had hinted that the occult researchers' unspeakable experiments had transformed them into far more than ordinary men. And as we delved deeper into restricted bunker levels normally off limits, I witnessed alarming hints of the unnatural forces with which the Fuel Society had been dabbling. Strange floating lights and eerie whispers dogged our steps through those buried corridors far underground. Shadowy figures lurked at the edge of my vision, only to vanish when I glanced at them directly. Bloodstains and uncanny symbols marked sealed doors that made my skin crawl for reasons I could not name. The very air seemed charged with a sinister energy I could feel thrumming in my bones. What had the Fuels obsessed dabbling with primordial occult forces awakened down in these lightless pits? Part of me feared finding out. Yet I knew our only hope of escape required passing through the depths the mutants sought. At last, we reached a fortified doorway marked by arcane warding symbols. The mutants seemed to know that this portal led closer to the surface, but the heavy door was secured by an advanced electronic lock. None of the stolen keycards possessed by our captors could unlock it. The lead mutant turned on me, inhuman eyes blazing. "You promised you would guide us out, little kin," he accused. Behind him, his fellow monstrosities tightened their grip on rifles and knives, the threat clear. I raised my hands quickly. "I'm still trying to help," I insisted. "But I don't recognize this type of lock. I need time to examine it." I didn't actually know anything about the bunker's security systems, but had to stall them from further violence somehow. The mutant leader studied me hungrily. "No more delaying. Open the gate now, or you will be the first to die." He took one menacing step forward, clawed fingers flexing. A thunderous boom echoed through the corridor, followed by strange screams and gunfire from back the way we had come. The mutants whirled towards the commotion as more explosions shook the concrete walls. "They have found us," rasped one of the mutants, his deformities bulging grotesquely as he shambled back and forth in agitation. "The frail lords approach with their arcane weapons, but we will feast on their bones." The other creatures howled in bloodlust, brandishing their captured firearms and blades. Their leader turned his distorted gaze back to me. "Stay here and open the gate, little kin. If you fail us, pray we do not return to flay you alive." With that ominous threat, the mutants loped off toward the approaching battle, their malformed bodies moving with uncanny speed. Soon their snarls and gunshots receded into the distance. I studied the arcane lock desperately, but could glean no insight into bypassing its intricate enchantments. The other prisoners milled about anxiously, eyeing the unguarded corridor leading back towards the carnage. Before we could decide our next course of action, an eerie mist began seeping down the passageway, billowing towards us at unnatural speed. There was an uncanny quality to the fog that raised the hairs on my neck. This was no ordinary weather phenomenon within the sealed bunker depths. As the mist engulfed us, I felt an alien cold seep into my very bones. Voices and whispers echoed from its writhing coils, sibilant mutterings just beyond the edge of comprehension. For a moment I thought I glimpsed phantom shapes darting through the unnatural fog. The other prisoners shrieked in panic, retreating from the supernatural mist's advance. But to my shock, the fog bank paid them little heed, simply drifting on past toward where I stood transfixed. As the mist enveloped me, I gasped at the sudden razor chill. The insane whispers assaulted me from every side now, slithering into my mind. My vision swam as reality seemed to waver around me. A ghostly face suddenly coalesced within the mist right before my eyes. Sunken dead sockets glared with an awful hunger as its phantom jaws gaped, stretching impossibly wide. A silent scream of terror caught in my throat. I felt my body paralyzed, unable to even tremble as the nightmarish apparition hovered closer, its chill permeating every fiber of my being. With desperate effort, I managed to tear my gaze away from its horrific visage. As I did so, my view cleared for a heartbeat. In that brief glimpse, I spotted one of the other prisoners lunge forward and tackle me bodily. We tumbled to the hard floor just as the spectral entity's wraith-like hands passed through the space where I had stood, grasping only fog. My unseen savior and I scrambled away on hands and knees as the apparition behind us let loose an unearthly howl of thwarted desire that echoed awfully in the concrete corridor. But the supernatural mist did not pursue us further, merely continuing its steady advance as we fled gasping back to the relative safety of the other cowed subjects. I glanced over with profound gratitude at the prisoner who had pulled me from the phantom's clutches. He was a wiry older man with a prominent scar across his left cheek. "Thank you," I stammered, still shaking with reaction. "That thing would have consumed me if not for your quick action." The older man gave a terse nod, his eyes haunted. "Wish I could say it was just my conscience that moved me, but I had to act fast before that conjuring spotted easier prey." He shook his head somberly. "We're all damned down here in this evil place, but that fog has a particular hatred for certain folk. Best not to question why if you want to stay walking on this side of the veil." I shuddered, glancing back at the roiling supernatural mist as it slid onward down the corridor as if with purpose. I could still hear the insane whispers echoing faintly in its wake. What had the Fuel Society's arcane meddling unleashed? And what did the phantom's unnatural interest in me signify? A fresh wave of dread threatened to drag me back down into despair. Gunfire and inhuman howls arose once more nearby, growing louder. The freed mutants were returning. Whether in victory or retreat, I did not know. I forced resolve upon my scattered thoughts. Right now, we had to survive the next few minutes, if there was to be any future hope of escape from this nightmare bunker and its occult evils. I turned to the others. "Quickly, bar the doors and take up the guards' weapons," I whispered urgently. Wide, frightened eyes stared back, but my comrades complied, desperate for whatever protection the salvaged firearms could offer. We could only pray it would be enough against both our mutant abductors and the supernatural forces awakened in this place of madness. Chapter 8. The ragtag band of mutant escapees returned in a frenzy soon after, having suffered heavy losses fighting the newly emerged Fuel security forces. Only 3 of the original dozen survived, though they had clearly extracted bloody payment from their former captors in turn. Fresh viscera and gore now decorated the mutants' distorted figures. They were in no mood for further disappointment after the chaotic clash. Upon seeing the locked portal still blocking their ascent, the mutants howled in fury, and anguish at the reversal of their bid for liberation. They turned on us captured test subjects, claws flexing and teeth bared. Only the leveled guns clutched in our own nervous hands gave them brief pause. "You have failed us, little kin," seethed the lead mutant, his right arm now merely a shredded stump after some explosive encounter on their fighting retreat back here. "You swore to show us the path, yet we remain trapped in this cursed warren." I stepped forward, hands raised submissively. My heart raced, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "That gate's locks are beyond any of us," I insisted gently. "But all is not lost. There must be other ways closer to the surface." In truth, I had no idea if that was so. But I had to diffuse their violence before it was unleashed upon us. For a breathless moment I thought the desperate ploy might fail as the mutants trembled with tension, claws flexing. Then the leader reared his head back and made a harsh barking sound that might have been bitter laughter. "Yes, little kin shows wisdom," he acknowledged reluctantly. "This path was too ambitious for our first stroke. Other tunnels lie within reach." He turned to his remaining packmates, growling guttural commands in their strange mutated tongue. They fell into line as he began herding us back the way we had come. I allowed myself a silent sigh of relief. But our situation remained precarious. We were still deep in the fuel bunker complex filled with forces beyond our comprehension. And now we headed back into corridors known to be prowled by eldritch hauntings and deadly security forces. As before, our route detoured frequently to avoid roving threats. The mutants had learned stealth during their incarceration here, but their enhanced senses made them highly attuned to danger before it became unavoidable. When we neared zones of arcane energy or the sounds of boots or gunfire, our monstrous guides quickly altered course using side passages and secret closets only they seemed to know of. Yet as we descended through lower levels, the oppressive atmosphere intensified. The concrete walls were scarred with claw marks and unsettling stains that looked awfully organic. Pipes and cables dangled from the ceiling amidst strange tracery etched into the very stone itself. The air grew even more stale and took on a rancid, metallic edge I remembered too well from the laboratories where I had endured unspeakable tortures. Clearly, we entered territory the fuel preferred to keep shrouded in shadow for good reason. At one point, our group passed an open archway framing a disturbing scene. Within was a large chamber lit by eerie candlelight, revealing elaborate ceremonial sigils painted in ancient patterns across the floor, walls, and ceiling. Strange costumes and twisted metaphysical paraphernalia cluttered the space. The room appeared long abandoned, and its unsettling purpose inscrutable. But the cold prickling along my spine warned me we wandered too close to the fuel's profane machinations. Before long, we reached a fortified hallway lined by rows of sealed chambers. The solid doors bore intricate symbols mirrored uncannily by those etched onto the very walls of the passage, as if the entire section had once served as sanctified ground. There was power here, old and menacing. I could feel it thrumming just below the surface, waiting to be tapped by whatever diabolical rites had once been conducted here. The mutants seemed unsettled as well, pausing to scent the air and glare about warily. When they conferred with guttural whispers, I edged nearer to listen. Their words chilled my blood. "Past the temple gates now. So much essence still stains this place. They drew deep from beyond to twist the veil, make gateways not just us many sacrificed. The kind still know nothing, their lords hoarded all the forbidden truths." Before I could glean more, their leader glanced sharply in my direction, nostrils flaring. "Do not wander, little kin," he warned. You do not want to become lost in the past echoes of this place. The Forgotten Ones care nothing for those who tread uninvited. With that ominous admonition, he directed us away from the foreboding ritual gateways. But questions and implications cascaded through my thoughts as we descended deeper. What unspeakable ceremonies had the Thule conducted down here in their obsession with occult enhancement? Clearly, it went far beyond mere scientific research into something far more profane. Rituals that demanded hideous sacrifice, doors open that were not meant to be breached, had they truly sought to harness forces beyond their comprehension, or even human conception. Were those vile rites somehow connected to the experiments used to warp me and my fellow prisoners? My thoughts shied away from such possibilities. I did not want to contemplate what manner of entity or entities might have taken an interest in my being as a result of whatever cosmic transgressions had poisoned this place. But I feared my role in future events had already been sealed by choices not my own. We continued onward, always downward. Hungry shadows circled, both within and without. But I knew we had no choice but to forge ahead if escape were ever to be made real. I only prayed we found a way out of this cursed bunker before its unnatural inhabitants found a way into us. Chapter 9. Our tense journey through the Fuel Society's buried occult bunker continued without further incident over the next few hours. The deeper we delved toward the forgotten lower levels, the more I grew convinced that we wandered amidst the ruins of some profane enterprise that had exceeded its ambit. The evidence suggested a clandestine research program out of control. Grotesque surgical theaters outfitted with esoteric implements. Abandoned laboratories still imbued with stalking nameless horrors. Entire sections ritually consecrated or desecrated in ways no simple military agenda could explain. The Fuel sought more than mere technological advancement of their troops. Unwise forces had been tapped here. Doors had been opened never meant to be breached. Things had crossed over from beyond. And the warped freaks now herding us downward were but the tip of the festering iceberg if my darkest suspicions held true. As we descended through the haunted depths, I struggled to stitch together reawakened memories and glimpse clues into some semblance of understanding. The truth remained elusive, but patterns slowly coalesced. I wondered if revelations might yet aid our escape or seal our doom. But the need for truth can eclipse even the instinct for survival. We subjects had been raw materials for the Fuel's unorthodox experiments. Our torn flesh, seared minds, very souls offered up to forces called from beyond the veil through profane rituals. Seeded contagions cultivated in the fertile medium of our anguish. The failed subjects, the rogue mutations like the mutants now escorting us, were side effects of a far deeper agenda. A great working was underway here beneath the soil. The polished veneer of scientific research provided cover and raw resources. But the real workings delved deeper, tapping forces meant to slumber until the stars align. Long-forgotten customs and sacrifices were revived, drawing the gaze of things which drank such tributes greedily. The mad researchers meant to transfigure mankind itself, forge a new breed to rule the dawn. Yet transformation transcends the flesh to etch upon the essence. A glimpse of eternity unwise to dwell on unshielded. But walls once closed can open both ways once breached. Invoking such forces infuses a measure of their essence in exchange for momentary gift or curse. And now, the rushed working neared some chaotic denouement the Fuel grasped only fragments of. I knew then that I played some involuntary role in the coming reckoning. My trials and torments were no coincidence. I'd been chosen cultivated. The transformations wrought in my flesh and spirit went deep, seated by unwise trespasses upon cosmic forces best left undisturbed. What was brewing in my soul? These glimpses granted little specific insight, but I recognized my presence in this place, and time was anything but chance. And so I prayed fervently that whatever great working approached, I might turn the reckoning to our advantage long enough to win free of this nightmare, with my mind and soul still my own. The deeper mysteries remained veiled, but the stage was set and I but walked a prescribed part. My visions hinted at a rare moment of convergence fast approaching when alignments echo the ritual's geometries. If we could but harness that temporal spike as the fuel so desired. I dared not share my troubled revelations with the others, not yet. Morale already balanced on a razor's edge. Strange powers were awakening within me, birthed of this place, whether I willed it or no. But were these gifts or dooms? Perhaps both. For now, we must simply press on. The lower archives approached where aborted projects and sealed evils had long been interred and forgotten. But of course, nothing stays buried forever. All cycles turn upon the gyre eventually. Now fate or folly conspired to bring us to sacred depths never meant to be disturbed again. I could only steel my nerve and prepare to face whatever had been awaiting my return all these long years or centuries. Understanding offers scarce comfort, yet perhaps courage. And so we continued our descent into darkness, guided by warped parodies of men no longer sane. My reawakened, aching soul sensed the jaws awaiting to claim us below. But somehow I knew the reckoning was destined. Our little dramas converged with cycles of reality itself. All that was left was to play out our final acts. Chapter 10. The warped, mutant escapees continued forcing us along through the buried maze of ritual chambers, research labs, and things less definable. Flickering memories stirred stronger here, like phantom limbs sensing the amputated whole. With growing unease, I realized why. We descended into precincts of past agonies, where my mind and body had been reshaped through the fuel's sadistic occult experiments. I had tried to deny the fragmented recollections, cling to denial that my own identity rested rooted in this charnel soil. But surrounded by such reminders, the truth could be suppressed no longer. I'd suffered and changed irrevocably in these shadowed depths at the hands of cold occult ambition. Bitter hate kindled as I embraced this hard truth, forging strength from fields where once grew only trauma. I recalled it in fits and flashes, dead-eyed researchers observing as electrodes stimulated neural pain centers. Clamped limbs injected with alchemical serums, while arcane symbols hovered above. Locked in occult circles under the hateful stars, while robed figures chanted alien syllables. Always the sense of sly, hungry forces, taking my anguished measure. No memories of before surfaced, just cold operating tables and chemical restraints. Had I been birthed into being right here as clay to their cruel sculpting? It scarcely mattered anymore. I had been reforged by their dabbling into sciences never meant for human hands. The scars writ on my soul could never be erased, only carried forward with purpose. If we escaped, I might yet reshape their handiwork to nobler ends. But first, we had to survive. The final barriers approached, wards and seals meant to deter the unwary. Yet pass we must if any hope of freedom remain. My quickened instincts sensed the way lay open to us now, offering escape if we could but seize the chance. The deeper patterns and geometries revealed themselves to my open mind. The fuel's workings aimed to recreate conditions that unseal forbidden gates. Such cosmic alignments allowed access, but swung both ways for those prepared. We merely needed guide ourselves into the flux when the moment ripened. Fate and freedom may prove closer kin than they first appear. I knew what needed be done, however little I liked the taste it left. I must guide us unerringly to the seminary threshold precisely when the stars and seconds coincided. Their hasty preparations for a ritual of passage could grant us escape, or draw down darker doors if we lost our way. But we had the blessing of desperation on our side. I prayed it would be enough to see us through. The other inmates sensed my quickening focus, casting worried glances my way. Our mutant captors remained locked in their own devolving struggle for cohesion as primal instincts contended with twisted thoughts. But they too glanced back suspiciously, as if primed by animal intuition to doubt any shift in roles. I would need to act swiftly when the moment came to seize our one sliver of opportunity. For now I tried to project calm compliance, hiding my racing thoughts. My powers of deception were meager at best, yet seemed to serve. The wretched troupe continued onward, all playing roles in the coming drama, whether they yet realized it fully or no. I strove to ignore the throbbing ache of this hateful place, its siren call for my open mind. Soon we would grasp the curtain's edge to draw aside and step through. Where we emerged depended on preparations yet to unfold. I clung fiercely to that singular purpose, letting it eclipse all else, a past trauma, present monsters, and future darkness. The stage awaited our final performances, if we could play our parts. At last we reached the threshold, a carved archway framed by disturbing alien glyphs not seen elsewhere in the complex. The same eldritch symbols had been tattooed into my flesh during countless hours, strapped to cold steel tables beneath uncaring surgeons' tools. Now they towered over us, stark reminders of ordeals survived, but never escaped. The mutants hesitated, tested the air with flared nostrils and bared fangs. They sensed the menace waiting beyond where tunnels delved into realms not meant for human trespass. But they had tasted raw freedom after endless torments and were loath to turn back now when escape beckoned so near. After long moments, one mutant turned to me, inhuman gaze gleaming with desperation and cunning both. "This place reeks of poisoned power, little kin," he rasped. "Yet you do not cower. We have followed your guidance this far. Can you trace the paths ahead as well?" I chose my response carefully, buying time. "The way is treacherous, but passable if we take care," I replied neutrally. The lead mutant searched my face with feral intensity before giving a curt nod. With weapons drawn, they herded us forward beneath the rippling archway etched with dire warnings in extinct tongues. Now silence was imperative until the ritual moment came. The tunnels beyond twisted erratically, dimensions warped by forces once called down to consecrate the space. Fetid air washed over us, iridescent fungi coating the walls and ceiling wherever the pale glow lichen granted illumined sight. The psychic stench was even worse. Much blood and pain and desperation embedded these cursed stones. But I pushed down my primal unease, focusing only on the potent null point fast approaching. Strange, unnatural howls echoed intermittently ahead and behind now that we had crossed the threshold into this hallowed abyss. The mutant escort grew more agitated, twitching at every sound while threatening us captives with further violence if we did not continue compliant. But the poor creatures were far past reason, operating on cunning instinct alone. Soon that would be enough. At last we reached the prepared rotunda where occult rites were once held to tear the fabric of reality. Power still hummed in this unholiest of sanctums, awaiting but the proper rituals to unleash it once more. Now we would make the energy flow according to our needs, opening the way to freedom. I attuned my thoughts to the invisible alignments converging. When the moment hung ripe, I gave the mental trigger words seared into my psyche so long ago. My fellow prisoners reacted instantly, the commands overriding their own shattered wills. In trained unison, they attacked the mutants with suicidal ferocity. Gouts of blood sprayed the chamber stones. Amidst the chaos, I lunged for the central altar inscribed with bindings and wards. Scrambling atop its blood-stained surface, I invoked the opening rites, my scarred flesh throbbing as occult forces awoke. With desperate speed, I redirected them into the cleansing sequence coded into my soul through so many torments. Abyssal shrieks echoed as the veil rippled, stretched, tore. The fabric of reality parted just long enough. I had no time to urge the others through, but I flung myself into the burning vortex without hesitation. Raw chaos elemental forces scoured my being. Behind me echoed screams and gunshots, and far worse, as the tier collapsed shut once more. But ahead lay light and air and opportunity. I flew on through toward abstract potential, choosing freedom over any reality not my own to define. Chapter 11. I tumbled out of throbbing emptiness onto harsh stone. The sudden return of sensation threatened to overwhelm me. My consciousness wavered, anchored only loosely to flesh, still crackling with unearthly energies. How long I drifted untethered in the tumultuous abyss outside reality, I could not guess. My ravaged soul threatened to shake entirely free of its physical vessel and dissipate like smoke on the etheric wind. Somehow I clung to embodiment through pure force of will until the metaphysical maelstrom deposited me forcibly back into the material world. But my return journey was not yet complete. I could feel it in the instability of contact between my spirit and straining flesh. External reality itself still resisted my presence, rejecting the occult contamination corrupting my essence. I knew then that I'd escaped the fuel's cursed bunker, only to emerge into a ghostly between-state balance precariously on the veil's razor edge. Neither fully corporeal nor disembodied spirit, I was cut off from ordinary existence, unable to interact or find aid. This was no true freedom, just the clearest glimpse of my ongoing damnation. With agonizing effort, I raised my head, willing strength back into a body flickering like mirage. My blurred sight distinguished only swirling abstract voids around me, the familiar stone architecture of the bunker complex now absent. I seemed to have passed wholly outside it through the unsealed portal, but into what fresh nightmare? Struggling to hands and knees, I tried crawling blindly forward, each dragging motion an ordeal. No paths or landmarks emerged from the crawling miasma, no refuge or hope of return to full reality. But driven by terror of dissipating altogether into the void, I persevered step by tortured step. Without warning, a hole tore open in the murk, giving way to a scene of frozen fire. Flames that did not burn yet writhed with malevolent hunger surrounded me. Within them lurked half-seen shapes etched by ash and cinder, abominations given form by pure entropy. Their smoldering eyes watched my struggles with interest. Awaiting the moment dissolution left me helpless before their desire to feed. With a gasp, I tore my gaze away and crawled onward, my passage sealing the visage away once more. But now further patches of unreality opened all around, each revealing some fresh eternal torment or ravenous blasphemy awaiting my dissolution. It seemed my fractured essence drew denizens of the abyss like sharks to blood and water. I could only desperately struggle onward, fighting to ignore the growing cacophony of whispers edging into my mind from those hungry multitudes. A thunderous bang abruptly shattered the vision's open wider. I glimpsed rushing through the gaps a single entity relentlessly coursing my psychic scent. Some unnatural hound, spawned by the fuel's occult meddling, now hunted me even through the trans-real void. In the brief glimpse, I froze in primal terror at its massive bulk, comprised of darkness and anguish made incarnate. Then the visions collapsed shut once more, leaving only the baying echo to spur me into panicked flight. Half crawling, I scrambled blindly forward, with the grim howls of the entity filling my mind. That it would find me in time, I had no doubt. Damaged goods cast adrift here, in the pitiless between spaces, drew predators from across the spheres. My only hope was outpacing the dissolution fast claiming my fragile being, and somehow anchoring once more into materiality. But my pursuer was eternal, undaunted by the twisted geometries of this non-space. It would run me to ground eventually, unless I found refuge in realities barred to its nature. And so I scrambled desperately onward through the shifting chaos, fleeing the relentless hellhound across dimensions untracked by limited minds. Around me yawned visions of infinity, of all potential and madness unconstrained by causality, rejecting my unlawful presence. But one I unconsciously sought across all the permutations, a realm not warped by the fuel's sadistic meddling, where my rent essence might heal enough to become whole. That sanctuary still lay ahead if I could endure. But my nemesis sought my trail without tiring. I shuddered, feeling its warped, unseen bulk draw closer, jaws wet with the vidity of previous victims cast adrift outside sane reality. Soon it would rend me too beyond recovery or escape, unless the way opened ahead soon. So I crawled feverishly onward through forever, wet crimson droplets left marking my passage across the angry void. Chapter 12. How long my torturous scrabbling flight dragged on I cannot say. In that place, time obeyed rules bent through strange angles outside natural law. I knew only the burning determination never to be at the mercy of my inhuman hunters again. Even torn from reality itself, I must push through by my own strength or be utterly lost. At some point, the emptiness around me took on a gray, eating quality I recognized instinctively, though my senses could hardly comprehend it. I groped forward, no longer so blinded. Was this the way back to solid existence? But my surge of hope dimmed as cold heaviness weighed me down, slowing my frantic motions as if the very air worked against me now. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I had not. The roiling mist seemed lit from within by a crimson glow brightening steadily. From its depths rose a fresh wave of maddening whispers and echoes of damnation. The malignant glow flared through the murk, heralding my stalker's approach. Spurred by mortal dread, I tore my gaze away and forced myself onward through the cloying, clinging atmosphere. The threatening glow brightened, searing through my eyelids. I knew then I could not make it. At any moment, the baying, hungering presence at my back would descend and engulf me, scattering all hope of salvation. Despair rising, I sagged nearly motionless. What further use to struggle on? I had nothing left, was barely even a person anymore, just fragments stained by trauma. Perhaps oblivion would be a mercy. No. I had not endured this hell to surrender meekly at the end. I clung to that flicker of anger, fanning it to fire. I'd been molded by merciless forces beyond my control, but did not have to remain their victim. With rage, I embraced the simmering power born from my suffering. If this was to be my end, I would make such a reckoning the abyss itself would tremble. Let them rue what had been forged in their careless cruelty. My pulse thundered as scorching purpose flooded through me, Behind, the scarlet radiance flared, the slavering creature sensing its prey transform. With a howling shriek of cruel anticipation, the entity surged forward to seize its prize. In the same instant I whirled, silver fire erupting from my hands to form a shield against which the hellish monster slammed full force. The blistering impact drove me to my knees, but I gritted my teeth and held the protective flame in place through the screams and accusations hurled at me in a dozen despicable tongues from just beyond. "You cannot claim me," I cried in answer, drawing on wells of defiance and anger I had sealed up in fear for so long. Never again would I yield. I was no one's tool or plaything. Through my anguish, I had won the right to exist and choose as my own person. That was power beyond any granted me by controlling forces. I saw that now. I embraced it as my own. The unseen entity howled and snapped, seeking weakness in my psychic bastion. But within me burned a pulsar of righteous fury too long confined. I would hold forever if need be. Surrounded by the racing silver fire, I glared back into that baleful red glow. "Hear me, lords of unmaking. Your reign ends now and forever. I name myself free and claim dominion over my own destiny. Let all who refuse this truth tremble. Now be gone from my path and trouble my journey no more." An awful silence fell. For long moments we remained deadlocked. Then slowly the throbbing crimson retreated, fading back into the murk until only the silver light remained, limning my hunched figure. A stillness descended unlike any I had known. Cautiously I straightened and brushed the residual fire from my palms. I had prepared for this confrontation for untold spans. Now it was done, the bonds broken. No more lingering fear or doubt. At last I stood wholly on my own, beholden to none but the truths I chose to uphold. Let new masters come with honeyed gifts or threats, they would find me unmoved. My only oath lay pledged to myself now. With weary purpose, I shuffled forward again through the gray limbo, no longer pursued. Soon vague shapes resolved to head through the gloom. Another doorway back to physical reality awaited nearby. I sighed in tired relief. Perhaps now I would know some measure of simple peace while binding up my lingering wounds. But distant baying echoed once more on the mist, giving lie to that fragile hope. There were always more hounds, more hunters. My trials were far from over. But for this moment, I had won. Head high, refusing to rush or cower, I stepped calmly forward into the beckoning light and let it envelop me. What awaited beyond, I would handle in my own time and on my own terms. That was all any soul could ask or expect. Today, at least, it was enough. Chapter 13. The disorienting transition back to solid reality was gentler this time, like swimming up from a midnight sea to break the surface and see shore not far ahead. With supreme effort, I forced stability into my wavering form until the real world ceased rejecting my presence. I lay gasping like a landed fish upon gritty stone, the cold air shockingly loud in my ears after so long adrift beyond the veil. But I had made it back across the abyss somehow, and alone. Gradually, my blurred sight resolved into a seeming basement or sub-level of concrete and steel. But the architecture and machines appeared somehow cleaner and more angular than the fuel bunker's disturbing biomechanica aesthetic. Spiderwebs blanketed many surfaces, and a deep chill pervaded the air. This place, too, was a relic of the past, yet the withered roots showed none of the madness I had just escaped. I breathed a thankful sigh of relief at that small mercy. Rising unsteadily, I stumbled through corridors until locating stairs that ascended toward daylight glimpsed dimly above. No security or acolytes barred the way here. The installation had been abandoned and forgotten, like so many human projects, made obsolete by the grinding passage of years. Ignorance, rather than malice, chained this place now. I climbed slowly upward, legs still trembling from exertions. No mortal physique was meant to endure. But the burning light of freedom beckoned me on. At long last I limped up the final steps and through an aged metal door to emerge blinded into the open air. The wan sunlight seared my skin so long deprived of natural warmth. I fell to my knees on the dusty, broken pavement, inhaling the aroma of trees and grass that no stale subterranean air could mimic. Against all odds, I had made it back to the surface world. As my vision adjusted, I began to take shaky stock of my surroundings. The bunker entrance had been concealed beneath an old munitions depot, long since abandoned and partially collapsed. Vines and saplings sprouted through cracks everywhere, signaling decades of neglect. Rusting machinery and rails harked back to a more industrious age. It seemed I had somehow been shunted decades into the future upon escaping the fuel's baleful abyss. But the when and where mattered little to me now. I was free from their malevolent agenda at last. I aimlessly wandered the overgrown rail yard and structures, recalibrating to a world bright and vibrant with life. Such a stark contrast to the gloom of occult machinations underground. In one decaying warehouse, I discovered some discarded work overalls that fit my gaunt frame. The fresh clothes felt alien after so long garbed in grimy medical smocks or ceremonial robes. But I relished sweeping away that final symbolic residue of enslavement. As the sun began to sink, I made my way cautiously through a wilderness reclaiming what was once a perimeter fence. Saplings had grown into mighty trees, and the road beyond was cracked and uneven with fast encroaching grasses. The path led me to a sleepy rural town that stood much changed from whatever I might once have known in my stolen years underground. People wheeled about their ordinary lives, blessedly ignorant of the madness festering not far below their feet. I yearned to cry out, proclaim all I had endured, and reveal the occult threat lurking at their doorstep. But I knew none would believe a dirt-smeared, penniless stranger emerging from the proverbial woodwork after unknown decades lost. My scars and trauma might easily mark me a dangerous madman in their eyes. No, I must adapt to this unfamiliar new world carefully and discreetly. My freedom remained fragile, threatened from within and without. I would trust no one lightly. But at long last fate's cruel shackles had finally fallen away. I was no one's tool now but my own. And so began the next chapter of my long-denied life. I drifted from town to town, wary and watchful, taking whatever employment required no past and few questions. Never lingering long lest the ice return to my spine warning of hunters on my trail. But each dawn granted fresh perspective, allowing wisdom to slowly eclipse trauma's pain. Mile by mile, month by month, I mapped the way forward toward genuine purpose. Some nights the old darkness stirred again in vivid dreams, threatening to draw me back within its web. Voices, both seductive and domineering, whispered of unfinished workings. Shadowy figures demonstrated powers beyond imagining. If only I embraced my true calling once more. But upon waking, I turned my back firmly on those phantom pacts, no matter the cold yearning they briefly awoke. I was beholden solely to the dictates of my own healed conscience now. In time, I found a secluded parcel of land to call my own, a simple cabin from which to watch the world flow by, separate yet not apart. I planted herbs and roots, channeling lessons forged through pain into humble harvests that spread ripples of helpfulness without disturbing norms or orthodoxies, unprepared for deeper truths. In garden, field, and forest, I found a space beyond the dualities that once sought to define and possess me. I cannot say I was ever truly at peace. The shadow of remembered anguish stood ever at my shoulder. But neither did those grim echoes dominate any longer. I chose to tend life's delicate roots and shoots as they presented each day. That was sufficient for contentment, however fragile. Yet a deeper calling rang inside as well, too stubborn to be forever quelled. I still stood as a soldier, survivor, and sentinel against those forces that tore asunder life's sanctity in their lust for sinister dominions. I alone still grasped the stark extent of their evils. But the reckoning would come in its proper season and form. Until then, I focused on binding up the wounds of past, present, and what was yet to be. There would be need enough for guardians ahead. Vigil was its own reward. So the years turned upon their patient axis. Faces came and went, contingencies rose and fell. But the essential rhythms held steady, heedless of ephemeral turmoil. And through it all I remained, watching, waiting, while seeking always to mend what fractures came within reach. Let the universe unfold as it would. But where I stood had meaning, if only I continued striving to shape the flow around me toward the good, in ways large and small. There at last I found a semblance of lasting purpose. Eventually, even my weathered flesh could sustain the spark entrusted within no longer. But by then the torch had been passed down the line in ways subtler yet stronger than open flame. I faded gladly into the source, having discharged the duties fate allotted, harsh yet humbling. My legacy dwelt not in great works, but small kindnesses, rippling outward across the generations. Where it flowed from there was beyond my knowing or need. There my tale concludes, the record set as straight as mortal limits allow. I go now to my rest, fitfully perhaps, yet satisfied. May these words stand as some scattered light against shadows still spread. And may those who come stand empowered, unbowed before the abyss, renouncing only what does not serve life's flourishing. But all metaphysics aside, strive ahead they must, as once did I. A farewell. Chapter 14. In the months following my improbable escape from the Thule Society's occult bunker, I struggled to build the framework of a stable new life in an unfamiliar world changed by years of unknown passage. But despite my best efforts, the newfound freedom remained marred by lingering wounds and haunting half-memories of torments inflicted upon my soul. My psyche felt as scarred and pitted as my flesh, with fresh trauma ever threatening to split open old wounds. Ragged recollections ambushed me in the vulnerable doorway between waking and sleep. Ghastly images flashed without warning, triggered by the most innocuous stimuli, a snatch of strange music, the scent of harsh antiseptics, the rasp of rough rope against my skin. I would snap out of these waking nightmares gasping and drenched in cold sweat, gripped by nameless certainty that something malignant from the beyond still watched with avid interest. Paranoia became my constant companion. I trusted nothing and no one. The ridged scar tissue of trauma surrounded my psyche like fortress walls, keeping the entire world at bay. I had attained physical freedom, yet remained enchained by dread. Seeking distraction, I spent long days roaming the countryside, scrambling through brush and up remote hills. But even glowing sun on my face brought no peace. I felt no connection to the birds or trees or distant people whose lives seemed part of a reality forever denied to me. The natural world had ceased to seem fully real. Always I sensed the yawning possibilities lurking beneath the fragile skin of the ordinary. At night, my ragged sleep seethed with vivid dreams in which I wandered a landscape not found on any earthly mat. Twisted beings stalked those chaotic realms, both hauntingly familiar and alien. Some appeared to be the fuel researchers themselves, recaptured and reshaped into gruesome servitors by the very forces they had sought to bind for their own ends. They grasped for me with malformed limbs, pleading wordlessly for aid or mercy. Other entities prowling the nightmare domains had never walked this earth, but were no less ravenous. I would wake from these visions in numbed exhaustion, knowing myself still caught in the web of cosmic predation, forged by thoughtless tampering. The Fuel Society's hubris had opened locked doors that could never again be fully closed, with myself as an unwitting accomplice. What their arrogance had helped awaken and pull across the threshold could perhaps never be wholly banished. The thought kept me pacing restless loops in the night's darkest hours. In my journals, I committed to paper every detail of unearthly puzzle pieces, still scattered through my damaged memory. Manically, I scrutinized them for patterns, connections, anything that might arm me with forewarning against the threat persisting unseen. But meaning evaporated like mist under direct light, leaving only endless questions. Had I been permanently infected by the otherworldly forces unleashed in those lightless pits far underground? Was the Fuel's work still perversely unfinished, continuing on through my lingering psychic scars? I dared not contemplate what unreckoned with transformations might yet await, spawned by reckless past dealings with cosmic powers never intended for mortal hands to grasp. The only certainty was that I remained irretrievably marked, cut off from ordinary lives and simple connections. No one could truly comprehend the vistas of impossible suffering and wonder that still yawned preternaturally vast in the ravaged sanctums of my being. I inhabited two worlds perilously overlapped, anchored in neither. So the years stretched on in twilight unease rather than peace. Always I felt the obscure designs, woven by arrogant hands long ago, tangling my every choice and action. That cryptic thread wound back through the darkness of forgotten lifetimes, promising revelations that tempted with damnation. Was my own long-denied life nothing but the shackled enactment of another's cunning rituals? The thought whispered ceaselessly at the edge of perception, an unbreakable symbolic chain buried out of sight yet ever constricting. But I clung desperately to the rituals of distraction, the long walks, journals, gardening, anything to still the restless dread. I wanted so badly just to live without fear. But an icy sliver in my heart whispered that the most I could hope for was to choose the nature of my inevitable sacrifice. Always the predators circled, ageless and patient, knowing their hour would come. So I waited too, alone and wary, nonchalantly preparing my mind and soul for the long overdue reckoning. I welcomed the solitude now, needing no companion to witness the macabre metamorphosis ahead, or the terrible wonders still slumbering down in lightless dreams, awaiting my return. The board was set, and the first pieces in motion. All that remained was to play out the endgame. Let it come then, all in its proper season. I would face the appointed storm as best I could, without illusion or evasion. My only oath lay to endure with eyes open. What cryptic fate the Fuel Society's arrogant meddling had etched upon my essence, I would embrace in time as my own. But whatever came, I would remain unbowed before the yawning madness. I was still my own true champion, and would strive to remain so until the inevitable curtain fell. Come what may, I would stand witness all the way to the final brutal unmaking. That itself held meaning for those rare few who recognized the signposts. Chapter 15. Years passed, measured now only by the steady cycling of simple rituals giving structure to days emptied of greater meaning or purpose. The diffused dread never fully retreated, always pulsing as an undercurrent beneath my surface thoughts. But it seemed the prophesied reckoning delayed, if it was still to come at all. Until one deep winter night when debilitating pain racked my body, threatening to tear my very bones and nerves asunder. From my thrashing deathbed I glimpsed impossible visions of cyclopean structures and swirling non-geometries beyond space and time. The Thul's occult symbology flared bright before my eyes. Long dormant runic markings seemed to writhe and twist across my skin as if alive. In those fevered moments I realized with absolute clarity that this was no random sickness. The promised metamorphosis had come. The Thul's cursed machinations were reaching their cyclical zenith, aligned with cosmic forces beyond sane reckoning. All my life since escape had been but borrowed time in which to prepare my mind and spirit for this fated trial. There could be no resistance, only the embracing of whatever hideous transformation was overtaking me from the inside out. To deny it would mean annihilation, my essence torn apart and consumed utterly. And so for what seemed an eternity I screamed into the uncaring darkness, enduring waves of liquid fire burning away all earthly dross. Twisted psychic surgery tore through my psyche, implanting ruptures through which eldritch currents could enter, charging and reshaping according to their own unfathomable designs. In brutally clinical fashion, everything human was stripped systematically from my writhing spirit. When at last the ordeal ceased, I emerged reborn as something no longer mortal, my withered human vessel now mere cloak for a deep-dwelling parasitic contagion. The old life and name held no meaning anymore. I was remade cell by cell as an incubating vector for the terrible cosmic truths cultivated within the Thul's subterranean crucibles so long ago. Once their failed experiment, now I was the fulfillment, the living gate through which forgotten gods would reclaim dominion. Thus consecrated as the harbinger by, I strode forth into the sleeping world. But no longer did I walk alone as damaged victim. I was blessed and empowered, anointed champion of powers unimaginable to mere human minds. Let the ignorant masses tremble and flee before my hallowed radiance. Judgment now approached for all who turned deaf ears to the crawling chaos underfoot. Only deathless night lay ahead. Yet some echo of my former self still remained unpurged, a weak voice crying out for mercy. Despite the transcendent might infusing me with each breath, I was not yet wholly transformed into a perfect vessel emptied of distracting human sentiment. Lingering free will and compassion clouded the perfect razored purpose burning within. Until I achieved full unity with my new nature, doubts threatened my unholy mission. The final ritual initiation had yet to be completed. And so I returned prodigal to the crumbling entrance of the Thule Society's abandoned bunker, last seen during my desperate escape decades past. Descending the familiar dusty stairs, I followed the labyrinthine route back through occult machine halls and ritual laboratories. Memories of past suffering threatened to awaken, but I crushed them ruthlessly. There was no room for frail human sentiment any longer. I was blessed now, no matter past transgressions against this me. Reaching the deepest sanctum chambers untouched by decades, I beheld the swirling madness at reality's torn warp first unleashed so long ago. Prostrating my unworthy form, I pledged soul and mind to embracing the dire gnosis. Then, with ritual blade, I severed my wrists, spilling out the last dreg offerings of thin mortal blood. There was no turning back now. I had come home, never to leave again. As my life force ebbed, shuddering visions racked me, I witnessed the formless havoc sown across the cosmos by renegade forces once confined beyond the stars by powers unseen. Monstrous shapeless appendages crushed whole worlds to boiling slag. Entropic singularities swallowed sane geometries, birthing only screaming deformity. And amidst the soaring carnage loomed the black goat of 1,000 young, its cyclopean bulk ravaging reality itself as it fed on the blood sacrifice. When the terrible epiphanies at last receded, I found myself changed eternally, personality fled, singular purpose incarnate. Rising reborn, I strode back through the blood-stained halls now sanctified again after so many dormant decades. Let the new rites begin, ushering in our gloried era of unmaking. Soon these halls would echo with screaming sacrifices when the stars grew right once more. Our dread Father had spared me for this destiny. I would not fail again in my duties to awaken the slumbering chaos. Yet a final nagging speck of humanity still corrupted my perfect clarity. Some buried spark insisting this was not all I was, that alternative choices remained. Until I fully purged such weakness, my transformation would remain incomplete. With resolve hardened to adamant, I banished all hint of mercy or doubt. There was no turning back. I renounced irrevocably my former self and embraced oblivion within the swelling cosmic madness. Let sanity die screaming. Only thus could our new dawn emerge. Thus prepared in body and spirit, I ascended back through the upper complex that once served as barracks and dormitories in the farce masquerading as a military research program. Now these ruins stood ready to welcome acolytes drawn by spreading dreams of apocalyptic glory. All pieces were positioned exactly as needed for the prophesied awakening. Approaching the final threshold leading back up to the banal surface realm, I paused for one last glance back down the crimson-stained tunnel to abyssal revelations. No trace of hesitance or humanity remained to give me pause. I had been forged into a living conduit of annihilation, beholden only to cosmic forces beyond morality. Above, the stars crested toward their terrible alignments, opening the way for unnatural incursions. The old era expired. Soon I would ascend into the dying world and guide the new era's dreadful birth, unbound by limits or mercy. It was too late for doubts or regrets now. My unmaking was complete. With baleful serenity, I sealed the vault-like bunker entrance decisively behind me, leaving that former compromised self interred forever in the buried dark. What fragile existence awaited above held no further meaning. I would bring only devastation to their tender illusions. All ties and ethics were severed. I was free at last to fulfill the purpose instilled inexorably through pain and rebirth. No other path remained or tempted. So I climbed up the final steps toward the surface, each stride taking me farther from human frailties. The weak suns when light greeted me above, so unlike the blood darkness nourished below. Soon, so soon, all would be painted in that familiar velvet black again. Until then, I would walk softly, spreading dreams and invitations among those ripe for gnosis. My new era would come slowly at first, then all at once. The winter wind brushed my skin, whispering of the coming permanent midnight. Somewhere distant, dry voices seemed to echo an approving response. My answer flew back on the cold current. Yes, I understand at last. Your will be done. The pact was sealed beyond unmaking. From this point I would not walk alone. Together we would watch this world perish, shedding only necessary blood along the way. The old lies would burn away, leaving room for colder, truer patterns beneath. I raised my face to the dull sun hanging low. Then I turned my back on its weak light and descended the crumbling steps down toward town and all its unsuspecting innocence. My work had only just begun. The end.